To many people, Michael Jordan is not only the greatest player of all time, but he's an athlete with a perfect legacy. He was dominant, productive, and the very definition of a winner. His finals record is a spotless 6-0 with 6 finals MVPs to back it up. He's iconic, stylish, charismatic, and ultimately the standard of basketball excellence. With all that being said, many have grown weary of the idolization of Michael Jordan. His reputation and his legacy is so pristine that some seem determined to find and exploit his faults, thus bringing him back to the level of the competition. First, they went after his era, claiming that he played against plumbers and accountants. After that failed to sway the masses, they went after his left hand. And once again, after that trend wore off, a new critique arose. Now, they're going after his defensive reputation and examining the legitimacy of his defensive accolades and statistics. It all started with this article that I'm sure many of you have read at this point. It's titled, "A Closer Look at Michael Jordan's 1988 DPOY Award Raises Questions About Its Validity. Has LeBron James Been Chasing a Ghost?" The article was written by a man named Tom Haberstroh, and he makes a lot of claims in this lengthy piece. So what we first need to know before I dig into the details is, who is Tom Haberstroh? Well, he's an NBA analyst, a podcaster, and a sports writer who began covering the NBA in 2013. Primarily, he's an analytics nerd and a guy who holds the value of statistics above all else. To a certain degree, I respect him for his analytical insight, because he was a guy who was truly ahead of the curve. Before Steph Curry truly broke out as an MVP level player, Tom Haberstroh was preaching the message that the NBA needed to be shooting more three-point shots. After some time, the league finally evolved into what Haberstroh had envisioned. He's a guy who's so committed to statistics that he'll even go against conventional basketball wisdom if it contradicts his numbers. For example, Haberstroh famously argued with Tracy McGrady on ESPN about how Kobe Bryant was not one of the most clutch players in the league. He's also written entire articles talking about how unintelligent heat check shots are, and that no one should be taking them. As you can see, he's pretty prone to making hot takes if his numbers warrant it. Now, getting back to the article at hand, Haberstroh claims that Michael Jordan's defensive numbers were not only inflated, but they were completely fabricated due to an agenda to get Jordan the Defensive Player of the Year award in 1988. You see, as Haberstroh correctly points out, Michael Jordan did not make the NBA's All-Defense team the previous season, and it was actually Michael Cooper who won the Defensive Player of the Year award in 1987. Both of these outcomes infuriated Michael Jordan, to the point that he wanted to make a statement with his defensive abilities in the 87 to 88 season. Allegedly, Jordan wasn't doing it alone, as the Bulls' official statistician was apparently boosting MJ's numbers by giving him extra blocks and steals on a regular basis. Now, for longtime basketball historians, the suggestion of this isn't necessarily anything new. For a long time, there have been narratives about NBA stars of the 80s and 90s getting home court treatment where their numbers are artificially inflated by biased statisticians. This has been a claim against the all-time leader in assists, John Stockton, for many years at this point. Famously, Nick Van Exel once recorded 23 assists in a single game, while playing for the Lakers in Los Angeles. But after further examination, it appears the actual assist total should have been closer to 17. But apparently, this wasn't just any ordinary homebrewed stat keeping for Jordan. But the article claims that not only did MJ have significantly greater defensive numbers at home, but it was the greatest margin of any Defensive Player of the Year winner in NBA history. I gotta be honest, when I first read this home versus road production differential, I wasn't too moved. During the late 80s, Chicago was a very young team who fed immensely off of the energy of their home crowd. Like most of the league at that point, they were simply a much better team at home than on the road. So of course, their best player stats are going to look better when they're playing in front of their home crowd. Regardless, the numbers were suspicious enough to lead Tom to investigate just how legitimate Jordan's defensive numbers were at home. Haberstroh claimed that he reached out to someone who preserved a collection of rare and historic NBA games. Tom was able to get 6 of the Bulls' regular season home games from that season, and he claims that he watched them in their entirety while doing his own stat keeping, and he said that the revelations were dramatic. According to Tom, Jordan only had an actual total of 12 steals in the 6 games, despite the fact that the box scores indicate that he had a total of 26 in that time frame. You heard that correctly. Apparently, MJ's steals were more than double what his actual total should have been. But here's the thing, we're just supposed to take his word for it. Haberstroh never posted the games or the highlights of the contest that he claimed to have watched and tracked statistically. Everybody's been debating his findings from these 6 games all over the internet, but pretty much no one has been able to see the footage. Jordan fans are constantly coming to MJ's defense, while Jordan's critics are quick to agree with Haberstroh, despite the fact that almost no one has seen any visual footage of the article's claims. Up to this point, I haven't seen a single analyst or YouTuber break down the actual footage and show the truth about these 6 games, but that is where this video comes in. I was determined to get to the bottom of this and show the actual footage to my viewers. Listed on the screen are the 6 games that Tom talks about in his article. In order to find these games, I had to scour the internet. Unfortunately, none of these 6 games could be found in their entirety on YouTube. So I'm out of luck, right? Wrong. That's when I found this website. It's called usasportsondvd.com. Essentially, it's this massive database of NBA games. On this site, you're able to search for specific games in NBA history with their search engine. And when you find the games you want, you can offer a trade for those games. It's essentially a hub for basketball superfans who want to preserve history. A link can be found to this page in the video's description and in the pinned comment. I looked up the 6 games that Haberstroh talked about, and sure enough, they were there in their fullness. All I had to do was request them, and then they got sent to me, and I watched them closely in their entirety, and did the stat keeping on my own. And now I'm ready to tell you and show you the truth about these games. Now before I start analyzing these games and showing you the footage, we first have to establish what constitutes a block and what constitutes a steal. Because if there's anything I've learned over the last couple of weeks, it's that a lot of people don't understand the definitions of these stats. Understanding these definitions will be of the utmost importance if we're going to accurately assess Jordan's actual statistics. First, what is the definition of a block? Well, according to the official NBA rulebook, a blocked shot is credited when a player deflects the course of a field goal attempt by an opponent and the shot is not made. A shot can be considered a block even if the ball was not in flight before it was being blocked. So to paraphrase for simplicity, if MJ gets a piece of the ball and it doesn't go in, it's a block. This is important to remember because Michael Jordan contested a lot of shots, and in many cases, it was extremely difficult to tell if he got a piece of the ball on a contest, especially when we're looking at 1980s tapes that look like it was filmed using a sweet potato. I'll give my honest opinion on MJ's block totals, but as you'll see shortly, it's up to interpretation in some cases. Now, what is the definition of a steal is a bit more cut and dry. According to the official NBA rulebook, a steal is credited to a player that legally takes the ball away from an opponent, intercepts a pass, or otherwise obtains possession on the ball following an opponent's turnover, providing the ball has remained in bounds and the clock has not stopped. If a player deflects a pass or dribble and controls his deflection either away from an opponent or towards a teammate, resulting in eventual possession for the defense, the player causing the deflection is credited with the steal. Again, that last detail is extremely important. If a ball is deflected, it's not necessarily the player who gathered it who gets the steal, but it's the one who initially deflected it. So now that we understand the definitions, let's get into it. The first of the 6 games was on November 20th, 1987 against the Atlanta Hawks. According to the official box score, MJ had 4 blocks and 4 steals. For both blocks and steals, I will be categorizing them as quote definitive and as quote possible, which is the category of the ones I don't count but can be debated. Here is Jordan's definitive blocks. This is the first. This is the second. And this is the third. Now for the ones that were possibly blocks. He might have got a piece of this first one. The second one occurred as the foul was committed, so that typically doesn't count. The third one he might have got a piece, but it's tough to tell. Now for Jordan's definitive steals. Pretty straightforward. And that's all the definitive steals I saw for Jordan in this game. He had a lot of deflections where the Hawks kept possession, and he forced a lot of bad passes and traveling violations, but those are not technically supposed to count as steals. Now here is Jordan's possible steal, and in my opinion, this shouldn't count, because he never established possession before losing it out of bounds. So now let's recap. The box score said that Jordan had 4 steals and 4 blocks. At most, he had 2 steals and 6 blocks. But by my sincerely honest count, he just had 1 steal and 3 blocks, which is well short of his box score total. Now let's move on to Game 2. This was on January 5th, 1988 against the Indiana Pacers. According to the box score, Jordan had a whopping 4 steals and 5 blocks. This was the first definitive block. And that was the only definitive block. This was his possible block. Now here's the definitive steal. And here's his possible steal. I didn't count this one for MJ because although he's the assigned defender, it doesn't look like he ever gets a piece of it before it ends up in Dave Corzine's hands. So to recap, based on the quote official stats, Jordan had 4 steals and 5 blocks, but based on my viewing, at most, he had 2 and 2, and by my actual count, he only had 1 of each. That is a jarring gap from the box score. We're only 2 games into Tom Haberstroh's 6-game sample, and things are already looking pretty bad for MJ. Now let's look at the third game, which was 2 days later against the Denver Nuggets. Allegedly, MJ had 6 steals and 4 blocks on this night. Here's the definitive blocks. Here's the possible blocks. Now the definitive steals. And possible steals. So to recap, 6 and 4 in the box score. I have 3 steals and 6 blocks at the most, and my actual count is 2 steals and 4 blocks. So the blocked shots are actually correct in this instance, but the steals appear to be grossly inflated. They're tripled to be precise. The fourth game was on January 16, 1988 against the Detroit Pistons. Fun fact, a giant brawl broke out in this random regular season game between the Pistons and the Bulls, because of course it did. The box score said that MJ had 4 steals and 4 blocks on this evening. Here are the definitive blocks. Here is the possible block. Here's the definitive steal. And here's the possible steal. The stat sheet said that there was 4 steals and 4 blocks. At most, he had 2 and 4. And by my honest count, he had 1 and 3. Even this steal by Rory Sparrow should have gone to the box score. But when we take a look, you'll see that Sparrow had no steals tallied. And this one should have been obvious. On to Game 5. This was on February 15, 1988 against the Atlanta Hawks. The box score says that MJ had 5 steals and 2 blocks. So let's take a look. The definitive blocks. This is the possible block, but I personally wouldn't count it since it occurred during the foul. There was no definitive steals, but here's the possible steals. At first glance, this first one looks like it possibly could have gone to MJ. But if you slow it down, you'll see that the Bulls' Mike Brown actually deflected it first, meaning it should be his steal regardless of the fact that MJ gathered it. But when you look at the box score, you'll see that Mike Brown suspiciously had 0 steals. The Bulls were unable to maintain possession on the second one where MJ tries to save it, so there's no clear steal here either. Let's recap. Box score says 5 steals and 2 blocks. At most, there was 2 steals and 2 blocks. And by my actual count, there was 0 steals and 1 block, making this potentially the most egregious stat keeping of any game yet. Now for Haberstroh's 6th and final game. This one was on March 18, 1988 against the Boston Celtics. The box score said that MJ had 5 steals and 1 block. So let's proceed with the definitive blocks. Now the possible block. The definitive steals. And lastly, the possible steals. Notice how each of these possible steals were all deflected by Jordan's teammates, meaning they should get the stat. But the only way MJ reaches his total of 5 steals is if you count all of these towards MJ instead. Recapping the 6th game, the box score said 5 steals and 1 block. At most, he had 5 steals and 2 blocks. And my actual count is 2 steals and 1 block. So now that we've completed Haberstroh's 6-game sample, what does the data tell us? Well, according to Tom's article, MJ's combined box scores indicate that he had a total of 28 steals and 20 blocks. But Haberstroh said that he got 12 steals, and I gotta be honest, I think even that is generous. According to my actual count, 7 steals and 16 blocks. Even if you count all of the possible steals and all the possible blocks throughout these 6 games, the total comes out to just 16 steals and a slightly higher 22 blocks. Without a shadow of a doubt, these 6 games were horrifically tracked by the Bulls statistician in a way that absolutely supported MJ's case for the Defensive Player of the Year award. Now, I could simply end the video there, saying that Tom Haberstroh was right, the footage proves it, and now we can all put an asterisk on MJ's lone DPOY. But something still wasn't sitting right with me. I thought to myself, why did Tom Haberstroh pick these 6 games specifically? Sure, they were all home games that were tracked by the team's statistician, but they had a whopping 41 home games that season. And he just happens to pick these 6 games that span over a 5-month stretch? Seems odd to me. Then I thought about the nature of this article, how he literally mentions LeBron James in the title, in the beginning of the article, and in his closing thoughts. Then I started doing the math. The article seems like it's oozing with bias to diminish Jordan and elevate LeBron James. I genuinely considered, was Clutch Sport funding this article? If Tom wanted to make an article to belittle Jordan and support James, then he would aim for the most egregious examples of bad stat keeping that he could possibly find. Which then made me think, did he cherry pick these games? Is it possible that Tom watched a lot more games than he said he did, and he only just grabbed a quote sample of the most egregious examples? Of course it's possible. So this realization meant one thing for me. I had to watch more games, but this time it was of my own random assortment. And if Jordan's numbers were actually similar to the box score, then that would probably tell me what I needed to know about Haberstroh's motive and tactics. Listed on the screen is the games I picked, and I selected these because they were all home games for the Bulls during the 87-88 season, and Jordan had some especially impressive defensive numbers during these contests. The first game was actually the first game of the regular season against the Philadelphia 76ers. This situation was especially interesting to me because if the Bulls statistician had an agenda to inflate Jordan's stats in order to get him the DPOY, you would think that they would start that process off with the very first game of the year. According to the box score, Jordan had a massive defensive performance of 6 steals and 4 blocks. Here's the footage of the blocks. Here's the footage of the possible blocks. Here's the steals. And here's a possible steal. Based on the footage, it's clear that MJ had at least 3 blocks and a pretty definitive total of 6 steals. Fun fact, all 6 of those steals came in the first half. Now it has to be said, we quickly noticed that this is a dramatic difference from the games that Haberstroh tallied, as the box score seems almost completely identical to what actually happened on the court. So let's press on. The next game was on December 12th, 1987 against the Houston Rockets, and Jordan's stats were 5 steals and 5 blocks. Here are the blocks. The possible blocks, the steals, and the possible steals. Again, this is almost completely accurate. My final count was 4 steals and 5 blocks, but you could really make the argument that he had as many as 8 blocked shots. It's so hard to tell with these lone angles and with the low quality footage. So again, I could easily see people disagreeing on the final tally. Regardless, both of these games are more accurate than Haberstroh's batch. My third game was on December 22nd against the Dallas Mavericks. In this contest, he allegedly had 4 steals and 2 blocks. Here's the blocks. Possible blocks. And possible steals. Now this is the first game of my batch that's egregiously off, and interestingly, it's in both positive and negative ways, but mostly negative. Again, the box score said 4 steals and 2 blocks, but my final count is 0 steals and 3 blocks, possibly as many as 6 blocks, because those 3 possible ones genuinely look like they may have been blocks. The 0 steals are brutal though. I'm telling you guys, I watched every minute of this game extremely closely, and I have no idea where the statistician pulled these steals from. I had 1 lone possible steal, but if you ask me, it definitely looks like John Paxson initially deflected the ball, meaning it should be his steal. Now let's look at the final game of my batch. It was on February 23rd, 1988 against the Seattle Supersonics. Allegedly, Jordan had 4 steals and 2 blocks. Here's the block. The possible blocks. The steals, and the possible steal. By my actual count, this one is short, as I have MJ with 3 steals instead of 4, and just 1 block instead of 2. But to be fair, I did see 2 or 3 possible blocks that may have actually been legit, but it's just too difficult to confirm with this low quality angle. So now that we've seen the footage of all 10 home games, what are some of my stats and conclusions? Well, first, we gotta tackle the elephant in the room, which is steals. According to the box scores, the combined total of MJ steals from these 10 games is 47, and according to my count, it's just 20. Even if you include all of the quote possible steals in this video, Jordan's total only comes out to 33, still falling way short of his recorded total of 47. No matter how you slice it, Jordan's steals were horrendously inaccurate over this 10-game sample. And this is not an insignificant sample either. 10 home games is roughly a quarter of the home games that were played that season, And myself and Haberstroh purposely selected the games where Jordan had the highest number of steals and blocks. So in reality, it's even worse than simply 25% of the home games. This extremely inaccurate steals total can only mean one of two things. Either the statistician was purposely inflating Jordan's steals, or the statistician was so painfully incompetent that he didn't know what actually defined a steal. If you ask me though, it was the former. Jordan was getting his steals inflated intentionally. Because if the statistician was just generally giving out steals out of ignorance, then more Bulls players should have seen their numbers inflated, and it usually was the opposite. In some cases, guys like Rory Sparrow, Charles Oakley, and Horace Grant were not getting credited as many steals as I witnessed them get. Again, I believe Michael Jordan is the greatest player of all time, and I'm usually very pro-Jordan on this channel. But I'm also honest, and I'm telling you, there's no way Jordan's steals were anywhere close to accurate this season. Now, it is important to mention that multiple things can be true at once. It can be true that Michael Jordan's steals were inflated, but he was also arguably the best defensive player that season. Haberstroh's article makes it seem like his high steals and blocks were mandatory in order to win the Defensive Player of the Year in years past. But that can't be true because Dennis Rodman was the back-to-back DPOY winner just 2 years later, while not averaging a single block or a single steal either season. Even back then, the voters were evaluating more than simply surface-level numbers, and saying otherwise is just being disingenuous for the sake of your argument. Now let's get into the next stat, which is blocks. If there was an agenda to inflate Jordan's defensive stats, the blocks sure didn't seem like they were a part of it. The box scores indicated that MJ had a total of 33 blocks over this 10-game stretch, and according to my count, he had 28. The thing is, I didn't have as good of a view as the guy sitting at the scorer's table, and if you count the possible blocks, that count skyrockets to 48. Obviously, not all of those were legitimate blocks, but some of them likely were, which probably means that the box score was pretty accurate in terms of total blocks. Personally, that was easily the most impressive thing I witnessed by watching these games closely. As a 6'6" guard, MJ was a shot-blocking machine. He contested everything. Without a shadow of a doubt, I can say that I've never seen a guard cover as much ground as MJ did as a shot blocker. He was constantly lurking, waiting for his moment to strike, similar to a prime Ray Lewis in the NFL. Whatever the actual total of Jordan's blocks were, I guarantee you that he altered at least 3 times as many. So in conclusion, here's the things I learned in this video. 1. Tom Haberstroh probably handpicked the most extreme examples. 2. There was a lot of truths in Tom's article, regardless of agenda. 3. MJ steals were definitely inflated to an insane degree. 4. Blocks were seemingly not a part of the inflation. 5. A young MJ is without question the best shot blocking guard that I've ever seen. 6. This video is gonna make people lose their minds on both sides of the argument. As far as my opinion on MJ's 1988 DPOY and if he should have kept it, well, you'll have to wait for my next video, as I'm tackling who the real DPOYs should have been in the 1980s. I also want to let you guys know that I'm not done researching these types of topics, because although we now have answers about MJ's 1988 season, it also raised a lot of questions, like just how widespread was this statistical inflation issue in the NBA? In future videos, I want to look at things like John Stockton's assists, or Alvin Robertson's record-breaking season where he averaged 3.7 steals a game, or heck, even Magic Johnson had a season early in his career where he averaged an insane number of steals, and then his numbers mysteriously declined dramatically to look much more pedestrian. I'll even look at some modern players and see if there's any more recent examples of statistical inflation. Again, I plan on learning the truth about that in future videos. This video took a lot of energy, a lot of effort, a lot of research, and a lot of time to make. So I'd really appreciate it if you'd be willing to hit that like button on your way out, and maybe share it with someone who's interested in the topic. So what do you guys think? Did MJ deserve the 1988 DPOY? And knowing what you know now, does that change the way you see basketball in any way? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments section below. Thanks for watching as always. Make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.